we'll find out.
You'll find out. I'm excited to see how that progresses. So then trailing back then, so Scott, I guess you had a little bit more of a traditional start and then transition into working with Craig, your father. And then when you started doing that through, was it through graphic design and building out websites, right? Because you had the Blitz Media.
Yeah.
What was the first?
The first version was Web Refinements.
Web Refinements. That's right.
Yeah. And I mean, it was called Web Refinements because Craig was focused on web only. I had done freelance work for him. So that's how I learned the web world, because I was curious about it, because I was going through college at the start of the .com boom and then the bubble bursting by the time I got out. And I had a traditional print design education. So yeah, we ended up switching the name from Web Refinements to Blitz Media Design, because we kept finding out our web clients had gone elsewhere for print design, and we're like, when I first started, we met with everyone and talked to them about the things that we could do now that I was part of the team and my background, and it didn't click. So yeah, that was the motivation for the first name change.
Yeah, never assume your clients remember what you do.
Okay.
They probably need constant reminders.
Interesting. So how did you manage that? Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it started with the occasional conversation. Hey guys, could you upload this PDF? We got a new brochure design. Can you put that on the website? And I was like, okay, that's frustrating, but all right, sure, I'll honor the request. And then it happened a few too many times where it's like, okay, it's not registering what we do. Let's change the name. It gives us an excuse, a reason to talk with clients and get more proactive about, here's what we can do. And I mean, it was a slow journey and evolution for us. And, over the years, we pushed more toward doing strategy, at the start of client relationships, getting to know them, their challenges, their struggles. So that way we had a really good understanding of them and could put together a proposal that fit them and where they wanted to go, rather than just being the order takers of, I need a website. You guys make websites. Can you make me a website? Type of thing. Yeah. In hindsight, I wish that journey and evolution had been faster. And as Craig mentioned a moment ago, I wish I knew some of the things that I know now back then, but it's all part of the process and journey and evolution of things. So
interesting. Yeah. So you were there for a bit, both of you together, and then decided somewhere along the line that you did not like the work. You were like, this is really frustrating. We're not getting paid enough for this. There's just constant revisions. Talk to me a little bit about that, and then how it started to evolve now into Blitz Creative.
There was no somewhere along the line we decided we didn't like the work. There's a very specific project.
Oh, right. Okay.
I mean, in fairness, I would say that, at least for me, building up to that, the work became less rewarding. And I think part of it, the web grew up. The kind of Wild West days where you were constantly having to learn and people were experimenting and breaking things. The web had become pretty standardized by a certain point, which is good for ultimately the end users. But as somebody building websites, all day, every day, at that point, it became boring. And a lot of the work and the clients and things weren't as engaging or creatively interesting. And I felt like I wanted something more. And we had also had some clients that had retired or been acquired. So we lost clients that way that we really did genuinely enjoy. So,
well, I think part of it too is, as the web grew up, part of the problem too is then suddenly you had everybody, oh, I heard about this website, or I saw this website, or my neighbor told me about his nephew does websites. And suddenly it felt like you're almost trying to defend the fact, wait a minute, we have a relationship, we have a proven track record with you. And now just because I think it's the pursuit of shiny object syndrome, they always think, well, I heard about somebody. And it's like, I've heard search engine optimization is really important. And yes, we've been doing that for you. So it just, it got so, the truth of the matter, we got to the point where we just didn't like a lot of our clients. And by not liking them, I'd say, I know you've heard us speak this before. Right now, we can genuinely say that just about all of our clients, we would be thrilled to invite them over to a backyard barbecue. I'm not sure we could have filled at that point the fingers of one hand of web clients we would have invited to that backyard barbecue. And if you don't like the people you're working with, that's a tough thing. It's tough to just work for money. And everybody, the money might be good, might be in, so-so, but you can't work for just money. You've got to work. You've got to be motivated. You've got to enjoy what you're doing. You're not sitting there constantly thinking, oh, well, this is worth such and such. If you did think about the money, I know in our case too, with the final web projects we were doing, it's like, why are we doing this? Because they're paying us this much money. Oh, yeah, okay.
And and to add to that, I mean, on the surface, it was a high budget web project. One problem, cost more than we made. So if you just want to put the ego statistic out there of the revenue that came in and ignore everything else, expenses and time and all of that, sure, it sounded glamorous, but it wasn't. We made a number of mistakes along the way. It almost pushed us out of business, and it was not rewarding. So I mean, it was defeating on a number of levels.
I think one of the things that was a mistake, because they had been a very good client for a long period of time. This was far and away the biggest project we did with them, but they decided to put somebody in-house, more or less in charge. So we became what Scott always called a mouse jockey. We were mouse jockeys.
And not just that, it was somebody in-house, but it was somebody in-house who was brand new to the team. And no fault of their own, they just didn't know what they didn't know, and we should have sounded the alarm on that earlier. And there were few too many goals and objectives trying to be mashed into one Frankenstein project. That we at least for me, it got distracted by initially the scale of the project. Trusted client. They trusted with a big project. There was a big budget to boot. So, just bent on too many areas where I should have established boundaries and said, no, this is concerning. This isn't going to lead to successful outcome. Push back more.
Okay.
I mean, there was plenty of blame to share around, including us, but we got to the point where at the end of that and looking at where our business was, and I think this is a key element. Sometimes when you get those whale clients or those huge projects, you get all excited and you think, oh, the money and everything. But you are so tied up on those, if you're a small team, that you neglect marketing and other things. So it was sort of like, too, at the end of that, we hadn't done anything for marketing for the last 6 months. We were spending incredible hours, late nights, working on New Year's Eve. I kid you not, New Year's Day. So when the whole thing finally imploded, it was sort of like, I don't know what we're going to do next, but I don't want to do this anymore. We've got to find a new niche, new clients or something. And I almost don't care what it is, as long as we feel part of their team and we like the people and we like what we're doing.
I see.
Something has got to change.
So what did that look like then? So you kind of went through this big client inside of this industry. You found out, you learned a lot, learned what you liked, what you didn't like. There were tons of learning opportunities to apply to business in the future, which, fast forward to today, that's what both of you are doing. But as you're bumped up against this deadline, working over New Year's and all of that, was that the time frame where you'd reach this apex of, we're not doing this anymore? we have to do something that's more meaningful, that we actually enjoy. And what did that process then look like? I mean, it sounds like, and from what I understand about the two of you, that you were really leaning into something that was more purposeful, something that felt mission-based, something that felt just super meaningful and that could move the needle in a big way inside of a specific industry. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we wanted to be passionate. We wanted to work with people who are passionate about what they do, and a passion we could share. And I think there was a little bit of luck involved in that, because right about that time, we got approached by a local provider supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and they wanted us to build a new website, and they want some help with marketing. And Scott, you could pick it up from there, because there is one question we always would ask.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we got more invested in doing strategy up front before building a website, and doing project work with a client. So in one of the conversations, we asked the question we always did: what's your greatest challenge as a business? We had become pretty conditioned to a lot of business owners going, ooh, it's a really good question, and thinking about it. I felt like I barely even finished the question, and they were like, we need more DSPs. And at that point, Craig and I were both clueless. We're like, okay, so we know there are lots of acronyms in this field. Give us the secret decoder ring, please. What on earth is a DSP? And they said, it's a job title. It stands for direct support professional. That's just the amazing human being that helps support the individuals with disabilities. And we just don't have enough of those employees. We have open positions. They mentioned that, like, this is a national, workforce crisis is the term that's always thrown around in this field. And in redoing their website and how they went about recruiting those people, because at first it's like, well, wait a minute, we're marketing guys. Like, how are we going to be able to help them with this challenge? That's a recruiting thing. And when we really gave it some thought, it's like, wait a minute, no, this is marketing and sales. It's just a different form of marketing and sales. Recruiting is you're trying to find the right people to potentially come and work for you. Marketing is about helping find the right audience to come and buy something from you. And hiring is a form of sales. You're ultimately trying to sell an employee that, hey, this is a good idea to come work for us for 40 hours or more a week. And that's a good decision in your life to make. So bringing that knowledge and experience translated really well. They were great to work with. We were making an impact, and we just felt like we were seeing the tip of the iceberg. And we were at a point, as Craig said, because of the project that almost put us under, blessing in disguise, besides this provider, and that's what these organizations call themselves. Most of them are nonprofits. And, they were great to work with. We had nothing else going on. So it was a pretty easy decision of, all right, they're awesome to work with. Is everyone else in this field like them? They keep talking about this workforce crisis. It sounds like there's something more. Are we just seeing the tip of the iceberg? So we both started reaching out to organizations, officials, associations, consultants, anybody, frankly, that would talk to us in the field, to just ask them some questions and get a better understanding. And almost everyone was very open to that. So it was an early sign that these are some good people to work with. There's more that we can do here to help.
That's crazy.
It didn't hurt us either that my wife spent 30 years in the field, and that for that first client, they liked the fact that at least we had some connection and some basic understanding. And I had gotten to work directly with teenagers with Down syndrome in college. So they liked our backstory, and that connected. But I think too would be the value of Scott goes a little deeper into, these interviews, and people were helpful, but there is a very specific approach to interviewing people if you want to go into a particular niche. So Scott, I'm sure you can explain CDIs better than I.
Yeah, and to give a lot of credit, Craig and I, as the years passed, we got smarter and smarter. And the strategy that I've mentioned, we invested in good mentorship and communities and education. And where we gained all this from is an organization called You Gurus. Brent Weaver is the founder, and he was mentoring us at that time. And he was creating a new program. He was doing customer development interviews with his current, community members, and we were in the community at that point. And so he was doing customer development interviews with us, and knowing we were, not in good shape as a business, he was giving us a little free extra help after we gave him some value for what he was trying to create. And he just kind of gave us a crash course on doing customer development interviews, and just took it and went to the races because we had nothing else to do. So, I mean, high level customer development interviews is a great way to vet, can I have an actual business doing what it is that I want to do? So, I mean, it starts simply with, making a list. A good early indication that there is something there that could sustain a business is, are there associations dedicated to this field that you're looking at? For us, we were looking at organizations that support people with disabilities. Pretty much every state in the United States has an association for those organizations. So they have conferences, they have education, they have events, they have membership fees, they do other things. So it was like, okay, this is a good early indication that if this industry can support this many associations, there's probably enough money there to support our business. So we made a list of, the actual organizations serving people with disabilities, some associations, and then it started with just humble, curious outreach, shooting an email, picking up the phone, getting a little uncomfortable and calling. And some people at first are like, well, I don't want to do cold calling. This isn't cold calling. Yeah, granted, you probably don't know the person. But if you reach out with humility and curiosity, things will go well. So the foundation of what we used was just basically, hey, we've worked with a client in this space. We really liked working with them. We're trying to learn more about the field. We want to get a better understanding of your greatest challenge. I'd really value your insight and perspective. Would you be open to talking for 20 minutes? And most people were like, yeah, sure. And some people responded quickly, and others it took multiple attempts, and then some. But everyone was really generous with their time, and it gave us a great education in a really short time span. And those initial conversations, some people try and pack too much into them, is a common mistake. Those first conversations, I was only focused on learning, asking them good questions and taking notes, and then saying at the end of those conversations, hey, so I'm hearing similar things. We're going to be working on some ideas of an offering to help with some of the challenges that you've described. Would you be open to having a conversation at that point and telling me, like, that sounds amazing, that sounds okay, that doesn't make sense, or hey, Scott, it's the worst idea I've ever heard. Throw that out. Putting people at ease. And almost everyone was like, yeah, sure, when you've got something, come back and talk to me. And then you take that potential offering, service, product, whatever it is that you're creating, and then have a conversation focused around that. And then out of that, typically you're going to find a few people that react with, okay, that sounds awesome. Can I just buy that from you? And that's how we landed our first client. Now it took a number of months, but again, the insight that I gained from those conversations was invaluable, because it really empowered us to speak their language and connect with them. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's like you're inside our heads. And it was that, no, I'm not. You told me these words. I wrote them down and then I said them back to you. It created a very real connection very quickly there, and gave us a good understanding of where they were, where they wanted to be, and what to create to potentially help bridge them from where they are to where they want to be.
I love that. Okay. Because I mean, even in the training and the mentorship and communities that I've bought into, we talk a lot about that, like understanding the bleeding neck of the people that we're trying to help, assist, serve, service, all of it. And so that was just a beautiful description of exactly what you guys did to really lay down the foundation and gain momentum inside of that pivot that you did inside your business. So thank you for taking the time to explain that. And it was just such a beautiful segue too, because I kind of want to get into that space of, people I'm anticipating are going to come at this with, I have not been in entrepreneurship, or if I have been, I've just dabbled, and I like, where does one start? Which I know is a really broad and a really big question. Because I can't necessarily define it down to a specific industry. So it's just kind of like a entrepreneurship one-on-one. If you guys can, like, what are these like first initial, like in terms of like finding out that you're in a place that there's a market for what you're wanting to sell, which you just kind of created, but like, what are some other additional steps that someone just starting out can kind of carve out for themselves?
I think those CDIs, the customer development interviews, are a great place to start. I would suggest, if you're passionate about something, find out if there's a viable opportunity there, but don't approach it from, oh, hey, I think they could use this, this, and this, so I'm going to go out and make calls and try to sell somebody. We did not, just because we'd had a success with one provider, when we started those calls, we didn't know if this would be a viable business. It turned out it is, and those customer development interviews, and particularly the way Scott described them, is just be curious, humble. You have nothing to sell. You're trying to learn to find out if it's a viable thing. We know from our involvement with You Gurus, we can rattle off the names of dozens of people who did this exact same thing, enjoyed similar or even greater success in completely different fields. So it's not that we just, oh, those guys got lucky and they found a niche with a particular pain. Almost every market, people have a really central problem, a central issue. And if you're going to build a business, you need to fully understand what their pains are, speak their language, understand it, rather than just coming in and, Leah, you need to do this. Mm-hmm. It's, that's not going to work. And I think part of it too is, if you're starting out, you need a singular focus. It's real easy to get sidetracked and pursue things, and it's suddenly like, oh, well, while I'm doing this, maybe I could sell t-shirts on the side or something like that. Scott and I both know the most important thing in being an entrepreneur is keep the main thing the main thing. Because every time we've gotten a little sidetracked, and we've done it, I've done it in my own past, it usually comes back to bite you. It does not help. You're much better focusing your energy on one thing.
And a lot of people, I think, are nervous about that, rightfully so. Like, well, Leah, what if this doesn't work out? What if it can't support my business, or what they need, I don't actually want to create, or I can't, that type of thing. Well, that's unfortunate, but the lessons that you learn in learning how to do those skills are going to speed up the progress you make when you go looking for the right fit. And certainly I think the other balancing act, as Craig said, keeping the main thing is tough. Now more than ever, people can moonlight, bootstrap, gig economy, whatever you want to call it, get creative to extend their runway, have some money coming in. I'd recommend for anyone doing that right now, that in the time that you spend investing in yourself and trying to start a business, that you keep that business really focused, rather than trying to do 1,000 things and spread that energy and effort super thin. Focus it in one direction, so that ideally you're making a mile of progress in that one direction while you're also working a full-time job or a part-time job to keep some money. I think one essential thing that, if I were starting today, is just the money. Looking at, okay, if I'm going all in on this and I've quit my job, how much runway do I have? If I make $0 for the next number of months, how many months am I good for? Is it 3? Is it 6? Is it a year? Is it a couple of weeks? Where am I at? And everyone's going to have a different comfort level. But I'd encourage anyone, have a clear idea of how long your runway is and what you can do to extend that runway if you are truly committed to making this business work, because it never goes quite as you plan.
And
So are there any other foundational pieces or golden nuggets that you can think of, again, to provide a knowledge base for someone starting out? And I'm searching for something, just because I've talked to you guys a number of times, and my mind, like, it's like that mind blown emoji, and I'm like, oh my God, write this down.
I'll give you a few, because of course I did some mentoring for new entrepreneurs before Scott and I really took off on this, and I gave up the mentoring because I just didn't have the time.
Right.
Or maybe I didn't want to make the time. But if anyone's thinking that, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and own my own company because that way I get to work short hours and I make tons of money. No, I used to joke with people. I say, oh, you own your own business, you can set your own hours. I said, yeah, I can go home anytime after 7 on weekdays and after 5 on weekends. As far as making money, I hope you do, but there are going to be times where you do not make money. It can be a feast or famine world. And I think the most important thing, and it was a question I asked everyone, I found out, are you married? Do you have a partner? Is there somebody in your life? And if the answer was yes, are they fully on board? Do they understand that being an entrepreneur, it's not like a 9-to-5 job where you're working for a local company and you go in at 9, you come home at 5. The work tends to bleed over to your personal life. So anyone close to you, a partner, a spouse, they're going to be impacted by your decisions, what's going on with you. And quite frankly, that was an adjustment for my wife early on, because I think her expectation was I just have like a regular job, but I guess that's never really been my mindset. So it's really important that, this isn't just you. This is a family commitment.
Okay.
Scott?
Yeah, I think in line with that, Leah, you've heard us mention Brad Martineau a number of times. From 6 Division is his company. If you're curious to look up more on him, Brad talks about getting really crystal clear on some foundational elements for your business, and the first being in line with what I shared a moment ago, as he calls it, cash money. What is it that you need out of your business in order for this whole thing to work? How much money do you need to take home? And I saw him do this from stage one time, and somebody, I think, instantly shouted out $100,000. And he's like, okay, great. Why? Basically called bullshit on it. And I'm in agreement, because I see it all the time. Oh, I want $1 million business. Oh, I want to make $100,000. Oh, well, those are nice, really round numbers that are easy to point to and feel like a metric of success in our society. Why do you actually need or want that? He pushes and encourages people to get clear on what it is that you need. And he tries to put people at ease, like, look, maybe you just need $64,000 in order to live the lifestyle that you want to live. And I'm not saying you can never make more than $64,000 a year, but like, what's the floor? What is the bare minimum in order to say, yep, this is okay, this is working, or no, I've got to go do something else or completely change things. So getting crystal clear on what it is that you need out of the business in order for it to be viable for you in your life, and looking at the time that you want to put into it, because certainly, as Craig mentioned, I think a lot of us like to joke in the entrepreneurial space. It's the definition of an entrepreneur is someone who works 80 hours a week to avoid working 40 for somebody else. And it's certainly true at times, but I also think now, with the benefit of hindsight, it's a double-edged sword, and it can become a nasty self-fulfilling prophecy. It
Mm.
doesn't always have to be that way. It certainly will be that way at times, but what business do you want to create? Um, and having, as Craig mentioned, the conversation with your spouse, significant other, um, because sometimes entrepreneurs feel that pull between time and money. Get really clear on with your significant other is, are we going to prioritize me making money above everything else, including time with you? Or is time with you the number one priority? And sometimes you may have to agree on, like, okay, look, for right now, for what's going on in life and business, this is going to be the priority. And then we'll shift back to the other priority. But having those tough conversations really helps take a lot of the tension out of it. And another lesson I've pulled from Brad is, he said it like this, that as entrepreneurs, we're really good at redlining ourselves. Like, meaning redlining, like when you're driving a car and you just slam down on that accelerator and the engine is screaming and the speedometer just skyrockets and gets up to the red. You can do that for a little while in your car and it's okay. But the optimal point there is a little while. And he talks about, as entrepreneurs, most of us are good at doing that, pushing ourselves really hard. And we need to have tough conversations with other people to be a safety net for us and pull us out of that and say, look, right now, because of what I'm working on in my business, I'm going to be redlining myself for the next X number of weeks or months. And I need you, if I try and push beyond this, to say, hey, Scott, you said you were going to redline yourself, and now you're trying to push beyond that. That wasn't what we agreed on.
Mm.
It can turn into a nasty habit. And then, yeah, you're just continuously working. And at least in my experience, working harder and harder, longer and longer, and redlining longer and longer doesn't produce better results. It produces worse results, worse decisions,
Mm.
more stress, more anxiety, less sleep, and most of us don't make great decisions under those conditions.
In fact,
Yeah.
when we first started working with Brad too, he not only had us go through an exercise where, how much money do you really need? What's that floor, as Scott mentioned, but also how much time off? What things do you want to be free to do? So that that was part of your spine or your core mission too. What do you want your life to look like? So Scott and I both wrote what we wanted for income, how much time off we wanted. Obviously, because I'm older and my wife's retired, it's like we wanted a little bit more time to vacation, travel, whatever. So, my objectives out of this are understandably different than Scott's, but they're equally important. And it's important for both of us to have some work-life balance.